The secret of Rockefeller's billion-dollar empire. In 1911, the United States government tried to destroy the most powerful company in America. They split it into 34 separate companies. They declared it illegal. They said it was over, and yet, the man behind it became even richer. Not slightly richer, exponentially richer. How do you lose your empire and still win? Tonight, we break down the real secret behind Rockefeller's billion-dollar machine. This is not a biography. This is a blueprint. In this video, you'll learn the monopoly strategy nobody talks about, the silent leverage tactic that crushed competitors, why breaking up his company multiplied his wealth, and the 3 invisible rules of power that still run modern corporations. By the end, you won't just understand Rockefeller. You'll understand how dominant businesses are really built. John D. Rockefeller was not the kind of man you would bet on. He didn't command rooms. He didn't inspire crowds. He didn't give dramatic speeches about changing the world. If you met him in his early 20s, you would have seen something very ordinary. A quiet young man, a ledger book under his arm, eyes fixed on numbers. He wasn't obsessed with fame. He was obsessed with precision. As a teenager, Rockefeller kept a small notebook where he recorded every cent he earned and spent. Every single cent. Not because he was poor, but because he wanted control. And that word, control, is the thread that runs through this entire empire. But to understand why that mattered, we have to go back to 1859. In 1859, oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Now it triggered something wild. Men flooded into the region. Farmers abandoned fields. Speculators poured in with borrowed money. Oil wells sprang up everywhere. Fortunes were made overnight and lost just as quickly. Prices swung violently. 1 week oil was expensive. The next week, it collapsed. It was unstable, emotional, volatile. It looked exciting. And that's exactly why Rockefeller avoided it. This is the first lesson. Most people run toward excitement. Strategic builders run toward stability. Rockefeller studied the chaos. And instead of asking, "How do I strike oil?" he asked, "Where is the predictable margin in this industry?" That question changed everything. Drilling was gambling. Refining was math. Crude oil, once extracted, had to be refined into kerosene before it could be sold for lighting. And every barrel needed transportation, processing, packaging, distribution. Rockefeller saw something others missed. The oil rush wasn't about oil wells. It was about infrastructure. The real money wasn't in the strike. It was in the system. So instead of chasing wells, he invested in a refinery. That decision separated him from everyone else in the industry. He wasn't playing the visible game. He was building the invisible one. And invisible games are where empires grow. In 1870, Rockefeller co-founded Standard Oil. But here's what made him dangerous. He didn't start with ambition. He started with analysis. While other refiners focused on output, Rockefeller focused on efficiency. He measured how much oil was wasted during refining, how much leakage occurred in transport, how much storage cost per barrel, how much packaging could be reused. He cut waste ruthlessly. He reinvested savings immediately. He negotiated relentlessly. He treated margins like oxygen. And slowly, quietly, Standard Oil began operating at lower costs than everyone else. But Rockefeller wasn't done, because lower cost wasn't the goal. Control was. This is where most founders misunderstand Rockefeller. They think he built a monopoly by crushing competitors. That came later. First, he eliminated uncertainty. He secured long-term contracts. He standardized processes. He stabilized supply chains. He studied railroad pricing. And here's something subtle but powerful. He built predictability in a chaotic industry. While oil prices fluctuated wildly, Standard Oil's operations became consistent. Consistency builds leverage. Leverage builds power. And power builds dominance. This was not accidental. This was structural design. Let's pause here, because this is where the real business lesson sits. Rockefeller wasn't trying to be the biggest. He was trying to be the most efficient, and efficiency compounds. Think about that. If your costs are even slightly lower than your competitors, you can survive price wars, undercut rivals, absorb downturns, reinvest faster. Efficiency is silent, but it is lethal in business. Rockefeller understood compounding before modern finance made it popular. Every efficiency gain multiplied over time, and competitors didn't even notice it happening. That's the most dangerous kind of advantage, the one that grows quietly. Standard Oil wasn't just refining oil, it was building layers, layer by layer. First refining, then storage, then transportation contracts, then pipelines, then distribution networks. Each layer reduced dependency. Each layer increased leverage. And here's the key shift. He stopped reacting to the market. He started shaping it. When you control supply chains, you don't just participate in markets. You influence them. That's when Standard Oil stopped being a company and started becoming a control machine. There's something else most people overlook. Rockefeller was patient. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't seek applause. He rarely gave interviews. He built quietly. And that silence gave him an advantage. Competitors underestimated him. They thought the oil boom was about expansion. He knew it was about structure. They chased growth. He built foundations. And foundations outlast growth cycles. That's why by the time people realized what was happening, it was too late. Standard Oil wasn't just bigger, it was structurally superior. At this stage in the story, Rockefeller hadn't yet dominated 90% of the market. He hadn't yet faced government intervention. He hadn't yet been labeled a monopolist. Right now, he was just doing something very simple, making his machine more efficient every single day. But here's the tension building beneath the surface. When one company becomes too efficient, too stable, too integrated, it doesn't just outperform competitors, it threatens them. And when enough competitors feel threatened, they push back. That pushback would define the next chapter. Because soon, Rockefeller wouldn't just be building systems, he would be negotiating with railroads, absorbing rivals, and redefining what power in business looks like. And that's where the real strategic chess game begins. Here's where everything changes. Up to this point, Rockefeller was building efficiency. Now, he was about to build leverage. In the 1870s, oil had a single unavoidable bottleneck: railroads. There were no pipelines stretching across the country yet. If you refined oil, you had to ship it. And if you had to ship it, you were dependent. Dependency is weakness. Rockefeller understood that before anyone else. So instead of fighting competitors refinery by refinery, he went to the railroads, not publicly, quietly, strategically. He negotiated rebates, discounted shipping rates that no one else received. That alone gave him an advantage. But he didn't stop there. He negotiated something called a drawback. This is where it becomes genius. Railroads would charge Rockefeller's competitors full price to ship oil, then secretly return a percentage of that payment to Rockefeller. Pause. That means every time a competitor shipped oil, Rockefeller made money, even when he wasn't selling, even when his rivals thought they were competing fairly. He had positioned himself at the infrastructure layer. This wasn't price competition, it was structural positioning. And here's what makes this powerful. His competitors didn't even understand why they were losing. They just saw shrinking margins, unpredictable cash flow, price pressure they couldn't match. Imagine fighting someone in the marketplace, not knowing the battlefield itself is tilted. That's what Rockefeller built. Yeah, most businesses compete on product. Few compete on infrastructure. Rockefeller didn't try to win at the surface level. He aligned with the systems underneath the industry. When you control or influence infrastructure, you don't react to markets. You shape them. But structural advantage creates something inevitable, consolidation, and that leads us to Cleveland. By 1872, Rockefeller's cost advantage was undeniable. He could refine cheaper, ship cheaper, sell cheaper, and survive longer in price wars. This is when he made his most aggressive move. He targeted Cleveland. At the time, Cleveland was a refining hub. Dozens of small refinery owners operated independently. Rockefeller approached them privately, one by one. His offer was simple: join Standard Oil, or compete against a company that can underprice you indefinitely. This wasn't intimidation, it was logic. He showed them the numbers. He explained his transportation advantage. He outlined the efficiencies. He offered them stock in Standard Oil. Some resisted, but then the price wars began. Standard Oil temporarily lowered prices below sustainable levels, not recklessly, strategically. Competitors burned through cash reserves. Bank loans tightened. Uncertainty spread. Owners began to panic. And then something psychological happened. Once a few major refiners joined Standard Oil, others followed. No one wanted to be the last independent operator facing the machine alone. Within months, Rockefeller absorbed 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. 22 in a matter of months. This wasn't just acquisition, it was consolidation through leverage. He didn't destroy them. He integrated them. He didn't want chaos. He wanted coordination. He called it cooperation. Critics later called it the Cleveland Massacre. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It worked. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of U.S. oil refining capacity. 90%. Let that register. One company controlling nearly an entire industry. But here's the deeper insight. It wasn't about oil. It was about layers of control. Rockefeller now influenced refining, transportation contracts, storage facilities, pricing power, distribution networks. He didn't just sell oil, he controlled how oil moved. And once you control movement, you control flow. And once you control flow, you control outcomes. But dominance creates attention, and attention invites opposition. As Standard Oil expanded, resentment grew. Independent refiners complained. Railroad agreements began leaking. Politicians heard whispers of unfair practices. And then came the journalist who changed everything. Ida Tarbell spent years investigating Standard Oil. She studied documents, interviewed former insiders, analyzed contracts. Her serialized expose detailed the rebate system, the drawbacks, the consolidation tactics, the pressure campaigns. Public perception shifted. Rockefeller, once viewed as efficient and disciplined, was now portrayed as ruthless and manipulative. Momentum built. Antitrust sentiment grew. The Sherman Antitrust Act, passed in 1890, became the weapon. And in 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil violated antitrust laws. The company was ordered to break apart. On paper, it was a decisive blow. Standard Oil would be split into 34 separate companies. Headlines declared, "The monopoly is dead. The empire has fallen. The machine is dismantled." But here's the tension building beneath that moment. Because Rockefeller wasn't panicking. He wasn't scrambling. He had anticipated risk. He had structured ownership carefully. And what happened next would turn apparent defeat into multiplication. When Standard Oil was divided into 34 companies, Rockefeller retained major ownership stakes in them. Those companies later evolved into giants like ExxonMobil, Chevron. Once independent, these companies competed. They became more efficient. Their stock prices surged, and Rockefeller's personal wealth doubled. The breakup didn't erase value. It unlocked it. The public saw punishment. Rockefeller saw restructuring. This is where the real lesson begins. Because sometimes dominance isn't about holding one massive structure together. It's about owning pieces of multiple powerful ones. That's asset positioning. That's structural foresight. And that's why Rockefeller didn't just build a company. He built an ecosystem. And in the next chapter, we break down exactly how that ecosystem thinking still shapes modern corporate giants today. In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled against Standard Oil. The company was ordered to dissolve 34 separate entities, new leadership structures, independent boards. On the surface, it looked like justice had been served. Government regulation restored fairness. Competition returned. The monopoly was broken. Rockefeller's dominance ended. That's the official version. And legally, it's correct. But here's the question that rarely gets asked. What does defeat actually mean in business? Is it losing control of operations? Is it losing public reputation? Or is it losing ownership of value? Because those are not the same thing. Headlines measure control, markets measure ownership, and business operates on structure. Let's break this down carefully. When Standard Oil was dismantled, Rockefeller stepped down from direct operational control. He no longer managed the empire as one unified machine, but he did not lose his equity. He owned significant shares in the newly created companies. That means while the structure changed, the asset base remained. And this distinction is critical. Governments can regulate companies. They can divide entities. They can restructure operations. But if ownership is preserved, value can still compound. So the first theory, that Rockefeller was defeated, depends on how you define defeat. If dominance means centralized control, then yes. If dominance means long-term wealth and influence, the story becomes more complicated. And that brings us to the second theory. When Standard Oil was divided into 34 companies, something unexpected happened. Those companies didn't collapse. They didn't weaken. They evolved. Some of them later became ExxonMobil, Chevron, major global energy corporations. Once independent, these companies began competing with one another. Competition drove innovation. Efficiency improved. Regional specialization increased. Stock valuations rose. And because Rockefeller owned shares across these entities, his personal wealth multiplied. Let's pause here. The public saw fragmentation. Rockefeller saw diversification. The government broke one centralized entity into multiple competitive ones. That move unintentionally unlocked market value. Why? Because markets reward focused performance. Investors could now evaluate each company individually. Management teams could optimize regionally. Operational decisions became faster. And competition within the former monopoly improved efficiency. This is what makes this moment extraordinary. The same event that was meant to punish dominance accelerated wealth creation. Rockefeller's net worth nearly doubled in the years following the breakup. In today's dollars, he may still be the wealthiest individual in modern history. This wasn't luck. It was structure. He had positioned himself as an owner, not just an operator. Operators lose power when companies restructure. Owners retain power when assets appreciate. That's asset positioning. And it's one of the most misunderstood strategies in business. Let's make this practical. If you build a company and tie your wealth entirely to operational control, regulation, disruption, or competition can destroy you. But if you structure ownership across multiple aligned entities, volatility becomes opportunity. Rockefeller didn't just build a monopoly. He built a network of ownership. And when that network decentralized, it became more valuable. But there's a deeper layer still. Because even ownership doesn't fully explain his long-term influence. That leads us to Theory 3. The real secret may not be monopoly. It may not even be ownership. It may be structural power. Rockefeller understood 3 principles at a level few others did. 1. Vertical integration. He controlled as many stages of the oil process as possible. Extraction partnerships, refining facilities, transportation contracts, storage infrastructure, distribution channels. When you control multiple layers of an industry, you reduce dependency. Dependency is vulnerability. Vertical integration reduces vulnerability. That creates stability. Stability creates leverage. And leverage creates dominance. 2. Cost leadership. Rockefeller didn't win by being flashy. He won by being cheaper, more efficient, more disciplined. He eliminated waste relentlessly. He standardized processes. He reinvested profits. He studied numbers obsessively. This gave him the ability to survive price wars that destroyed competitors. If you can operate profitably at lower margins than everyone else, you control the battlefield. You decide how long the fight lasts. Most businesses try to increase price. Rockefeller focused on reducing cost. That's strategic asymmetry. 3. Patience. Perhaps his greatest weapon. Rockefeller didn't chase quarterly applause. He built slowly, quietly, compounding advantages over decades. He wasn't interested in hype. He was interested in infrastructure. Infrastructure compounds. Hype fades. This mindset is rare in modern business culture. Today, many founders chase valuation spikes. Rockefeller chased structural permanence. He built pipelines before they were fashionable. He secured contracts before others saw their value. He aligned with railroads before competitors realized the importance of transportation leverage. He wasn't reacting to trends. He was shaping foundations. And that's the difference between a powerful company and a lasting empire. So which theory is correct? Was he defeated? Was the breakup a multiplier? Or was structural power the true secret? The answer may be this. Rockefeller built in layers. Operational dominance. Ownership, diversification. Structural integration. When one layer was attacked, the others remained. When centralized control ended, ownership expanded. When public criticism intensified, infrastructure still operated. That's multi-layered power. And that's why his influence extended beyond oil. Through philanthropy, through finance, through institutional funding, through generational wealth structures. He didn't just build a company, he built resilience. And resilience is the ultimate competitive advantage. Now here's the deeper business question. Are you building something that collapses if one pillar falls? Or are you building layered leverage because markets change, regulations change, industries shift, but structure endures? Rockefeller's true secret wasn't oil. It wasn't even monopoly. It was architecture, business architecture. And that's what we're about to translate into modern strategy in the next chapter. For decades, people have debated Rockefeller. Was he ruthless? Was he unfair? Was he a monopolist who bent the rules? But those debates miss the deeper insight. Because Rockefeller's real advantage wasn't aggression. It wasn't even oil. It was infrastructure. He did not chase visibility. He did not build a brand empire in the modern sense. He didn't obsess over public image. He built systems, oil pipelines stretching across states, refineries operating at unmatched efficiency, storage facilities positioned strategically, distribution agreements locking in long-term control. He built layers that other businesses depended on, and dependency is power. Let's slow this down. Most entrepreneurs build products. Some build companies. Very few build ecosystems. Rockefeller built an ecosystem. An ecosystem is different from a company. A company sells something. An ecosystem becomes necessary. Standard Oil didn't just sell refined oil. It shaped how oil moved, how it was stored, how it was priced, how it reached markets. Competitors could try to sell oil, but they still had to operate inside the system Rockefeller influenced. And that's a different level of dominance. Now here's where the twist sharpens. When Standard Oil was dismantled in 1911, the public celebrated. The centralized monopoly was gone. But pipelines were still there. Refineries were still there. Distribution networks were still operating. Infrastructure doesn't disappear because a company name changes. It persists. And Rockefeller still owned major shares in the resulting companies. So what looked like destruction was actually decentralization. And decentralization unlocked value. His ownership multiplied across multiple powerful firms. Competition among them increased efficiency. Market valuations climbed, and Rockefeller's personal wealth surged. Adjusted for inflation, many historians estimate that John D. Rockefeller may still be the richest individual in modern history. And yet richer than tech billionaires. Richer than industrial titans. Not because he launched the most exciting product, but because he controlled the ecosystem beneath the product. And this is the part most business builders overlook. They focus on innovation. He focused on position. They focus on brand. He focused on structure. They focus on attention. He focused on control. Control of cost. Control of supply. Control of distribution. Control of leverage. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you own the infrastructure, you don't need to win every battle. You win by default. When competitors depend on systems you influence, your power compounds invisibly. And invisible power is the most durable kind. Think about this in modern terms. Technology companies that own platforms. Companies that control logistics networks. Firms that manage payment systems. They don't just sell products, they shape ecosystems. And once you shape ecosystems, value flows toward you naturally. That's what Rockefeller understood over a century ago. He wasn't building quarterly profit spikes. He was building architecture. Architecture outlives cycles. Architecture survives regulation. Architecture adapts. When Standard Oil fell as a centralized entity, the architecture remained. And because he owned pieces of the architecture, he continued to benefit. That's the secret. Ecosystem control, not product innovation, not branding, not hype. Control. But let's go one level deeper. Why does ecosystem control work? Because it reduces volatility. If one revenue stream weakens, another strengthens. If one company underperforms, another grows. If regulation hits one area and his value shifts elsewhere within the network, Rockefeller didn't tie his wealth to one entity. He tied it to a structure. And structures are harder to dismantle than companies. This is where the entire story reframes. Rockefeller wasn't obsessed with oil. Oil was simply the medium. He was obsessed with leverage. He identified the choke points. He positioned himself there. He layered ownership. He built patiently. And when the storm came, he wasn't wiped out. He was multiplied. Now here's the question that should linger with you. In your business, are you building something visible or something foundational? Are you competing at the surface level or positioning yourself within the infrastructure layer? Because the market rewards innovation loudly, but it rewards control quietly. Rockefeller chose quiet power. And that choice changed financial history. That's the twist. Not domination through aggression, but domination through architecture. And once you see business through that lens, you never look at companies the same way again. So now the question becomes, in today's economy, who is building ecosystems? Who is building infrastructure? Who is quietly positioning themselves across supply chains? And more importantly, are you building a business or are you building leverage? Let me know in the comments. Do you think Rockefeller was ruthless or simply strategic? And if you want deep breakdowns of the business strategies behind history's most powerful empires, subscribe, because the next episode won't just tell you what happened.